So good evening, everyone. My name is Oluwase Wadiu. I run an online community. It's an academic group where we come together as researchers and we support each other with our writing and everything just to make our PhD journey smoother. And once in a month, we usually have a research skills section where we talk about a particular topic. We get guest speakers to speak about a particular topic that we have issues with or we just need some help with. So today I have my supervisor. So it's such a interesting section, and I'm so excited to have my supervisor here with me, Dr. Denis. So I've been to several of his methodology classes, and I know he's very knowledgeable in this area. So he's an academic supervisor, is a senior lecturer, and I can't talk about my research journey without him. He's been quite supportive. So help me welcome Dr. Denis today, as he will be speaking to us about research methodology.
Okay, thanks for having me. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of my knowledge and experience, but also to hear from you guys about what you've done so far. What I'm trying to share with you is not something new, because I don't know where you're coming from as far as research is concerned. And my belief as far as research is concerned is to start with the basics. Unless we know the basics, it's very difficult to enter into depth of the research. So I'm going to give you some hints about some of the things I feel that we need to know. I was given lots of topics to cover, but I can't cover each and everything in depth. But I just give you an idea about some of the things, but you are more than welcome to ask me questions anytime you feel like. And if you feel that you want to put a question in the chat, that's absolutely fine. But I'll give you some about 20 minutes at the end of my topic or my discussion, my sharing with you, to ask questions, any question you feel like asking me, either on the topics I've covered or anything else that you feel that is more important for me to talk about. So just want to give you a few ideas about some of the things I think we need to know. And as I said before, most importantly, is to start with the basics. Unless we know the basics, there's no way we can move forward. And in the first instance, I'm going to give you an overview about what some of the things I plan to cover. As Adia had said, I said this is a masterclass, and she has worked so hard to organize it. And I do believe that it is very, very helpful for the students. And when she asked me to come and talk, I said, yeah, why not? Let me share some of my ideas to the students. Some of them may be familiar with some of the things that we talk about, and some may not be familiar with. As I said before, I don't know where everybody is coming from as far as the research is concerned. But however, we've got one common denominator, and that is research. And that's where I need to start from. So the first thing I look at here, I've got about 5 objectives. The first one is just to give you a general understanding of what is meant by research methodologies. I would lose the word research methodology with caution, because most people talk about research method. And I don't want to differentiate between research methodology and research methods. However, if you want me to do that, I'm more than happy to do it. Then I was told I need to talk about to differentiate between quantitative and qualitative research methodologies. And I'm going to identify when and how to use mixed method research, and also to evaluate some of the problems and maybe look for ways in which you can select the appropriate research methods. And probably later on, I will give you some kind of reflective questions to ponder upon. As I said, and I need to go back to the basics, let us start from where we are and what we've done so far and what we know. Is the first instance is about the understand what is research. As I said before, what is joining us, all of us here, is research. And the research, in a way, is what I call a systematic kind of way of finding information, of looking for answers. We all have questions, but we need to find out what sort of answers can help us to what sort of questions we can ask to answer the topic. It's a process, not only an organized, systematic way of finding answers to questions, but also is a process of carrying out an investigation. This can be in terms of the event, can be in terms of object, but we do it in a systematic way, carefully. What's the reason behind it? To understand the object of that kind of event. But also we look at research as a process of conducting a study. The word I really like very much is making an inquiry. To me, that's a key word we need to base ourselves on, is to unravel, is to discover. This discovery can either be in new facts, can be built on the existing facts, or coming out something that never happened before, something we never even thought about, even we as researchers, and we're taken by surprise. Oh my word, I found this information I never knew about. So when we talk about research methods, then we talk about the methods or ways of collecting data to answer our research question. So when we talk about data collection or data collection techniques, it includes how to get respondents, how to ask questions, and how to analyze the data. So that's the key. As I said, I'm using the word research method deservingly because there's what's called research methodology. And in my view, research methodology is divided into three parts. The first one is about the philosophy, which I do believe each and everyone should be aware of. The philosophy it becomes so important. And some of the common philosophies we use are like, for example, positivism, interpretivism, realism, critical realism, and so on. And so on. There are so many of them. And another aspect we talk about such methodologies, we talk about research assumptions. Things other people call them research elements. And those we mean by epistemology, axiology, and ontology. And then we come to what we call research approaches, whereby we talk about inductive, deductive, and abductive. So that gives you an overview regarding what we mean by research methodologies. So what I'm covering today is about research methods, is about the data collection, it's about having a plan, what we call research design. It's having a framework we're going to work on. But before we indulge ourselves into the research data collection, let us go back and ask ourselves, what is our research question? What is our research title? And what's our aim and objectives? There is no way we can talk about a research topic or cut a research without having concrete or specific research objectives. To me, research objectives are so important, and that should form the basis of our own research. Without clear research objectives, we cannot move forward. And if we move forward, we shall collapse. We shall go back to basics. So therefore, let's start with what we mean by a research process. Within a research, we said we are going to identify a problem, which I do believe each and everyone has identified, or maybe is in the process. We may have identified the problem, but we're not sure how we're going to solve that problem. We have come with some research questions. I do believe strong research questions play an important part in as far as research is concerned. But the question is, how do we derive to research questions? We've got to have a research topic. We have to have a problem. We have to have an aim, and we need to have objectives. Once we've done that, then we come to what we call the methodology section. Then we choose the method we are going to use. In that, we're going to deal with what we call data collection. We talk about data analysis, we talk about the findings and the conclusion. Central to all this is the methodology, and as well as data collection. And that's where I'm going to base myself today. Just discuss this evening about the methodology selection and data collection. The first thing we need to think about, we all have a research problem, which I do believe everybody has identified. which is pretty good. Now, this, to me, when you are a doc student, the research or the topic you've got, I call it a working topic. It is not 100% finalized because, and that's why you've got measures in place, like, for example, R9 that you need to complete if you change your topic. So therefore, this is a working topic. So which means that we've got some aims or an aim and we've got objectives. I do believe that the best way to do any kind of research is to have one particular aim, not have two aims. You've got two aims, it's as if we are doing two research or two research topics. So in such aim, which of course we define the overall purpose of our study, it gives us a broad research direction. That means we know where we want to go. And of course, because it's an aim, then we have intended outcomes, because there's something we aim at getting. And as I said before, it's usually written as one clear statement. Not too long and not too short, but just right. 15 to 20 words to me, I feel are more than enough for the research aim. If it is too long, then becomes the problem. If too short, then it's a problem in itself. The aim itself is a broad kind of intended outcome. How are we going to reach our destination? How are we going to achieve this aim? The best way is to have objectives. And I will talk about objectives because that's so fundamental, not only in the introduction, not only in the methodology, but also in the conclusion. So everything we are working on is get towards research objectives. How do we ensure that the objective we set ourselves, we're going to achieve them? Therefore, having got a better understanding of our research topic, then we can start breaking the aim into specific components. And these specific components are what I term as the objectives. So therefore, objectives are going to help us to define what are called the practical steps of the study. It will guide us in the research process, which we've already alluded to, what the research process is all about: identifying the problem, collecting the data, and so on. And then it will help us, will guide us, or will guide the research process systematically, following a particular kind of order. Without objectives, there is no way we can move forward. And that's why I trying to emphasize the importance of having objectives. Usually, the objectives are as multiple specific statements, and these are written in bullet points. So therefore, some people do number them, that's absolutely fine. So we are making short, but very, very important. And in those objectives we've got, we are going to find what ways, how we are going to fulfill, what's going to help us to fulfill our aim. These objectives play an important part as far as research is concerned. Without them, forget about the method we're going to use. And that's why I feel that it's very important to think about this roadmap. I call it roadmap because that's what we've got to navigate. We've got to move forward to reach our destination. In order to move forward, we need specific, clear objectives. Now, what's the purpose of these objectives? So this, as I need to emphasize, that must be a single goal statement that explains what the study intends to accomplish. So at the back of our mind, we've got to have a name. Why am I doing this research? Why am I doing this PhD? What do I want to get out of it? Or what want others are going to get out of this? So therefore, the objective should provide us with a specific and accurate outline of the overall purpose of the study. In other words, objectives need to be broad. Once they are broad, and then, the aim has to be broad in the sense that we're going to break the aim into small parts. That's what's called objectives. So the specific objective of this study, so you've got to think about what sort of terminologies am I going to use? And there come the terminologies, all that called action verbs. Those are very, very important if you talk about the data collection method. So I give you some specific objective of this study. For example, can be to discover the effect, can be the contribution, can be to influence, can be the role of, can be to establish, can be ascertain, can be to identify the impact. There's so many ways in which you can write the objectives. However, what is very important for us, because we're dealing with data collection, we are about looking at qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method, then we need to start thinking about what sort of terminologies, what are called action verbs, we're going to use specifically for the method we've chosen. For example, if you decide to use qualitative, there must be specific terminologies or specific verbs, keywords to use that will determine that you are using that particular kind of method. Or if you use a quantitative, what sort of keywords, what sort of action verbs am I going to use that will determine whether I'm using this method or not. Similarly, when talk about mixed method, and that's where we need to start thinking very hard. Oftentimes, we find ourselves writing any kind of terminology, any kind of keyword, because it sounds good, but not knowing it underneath it, it has to be a determinant of the sort of method we're going to choose. And that's something we need to emphasize in our research, especially if you're going to do mixed method or you think about using one single method for your collection. So therefore, that's why you start thinking, okay, so if you went back and asked myself, how did I choose these terminologies? What was the back of my mind when I was determining or writing my objectives? Did I think about the method I'm going to use, or because I like the word and that's why I used it? So that's something we need to start thinking ahead or think about as we go along. So in terms of research objectives, why emphasize that such objectives are very, very important. They are very important because they provide a clear direction for the research. They guide us in such design. They define the scope of the study. They help us formulate such question and hypothesis. They ensure alignment in different areas of research. They provide a framework for data collection, so you can see why it is important to have clear, specific objectives. Other people, they say they must be smart. Okay, so they support evaluation of the research outcomes. They improve clarity and focus. They help us organize to the thesis structure. They assist in maintaining consistency. They help identify limitations and recommendation. But more important for me here, which I feel like here, is that it provides a framework for data collection. And that's where such method comes in. So if we don't formulate the objectives clearly, then we are going to have a problem in determining what sort of methods we are going to use. So when you think about selecting a method, think about your research objective and say, okay, what sort of method am I going to use and what are the keywords I'm going to use if at all I want to use this particular kind of method. So what I've tried to do, this is quite lengthy, quite a lot of words, but give you a kind of action verbs. I call them action verbs because we are going to implement them. We're going to make use of them. So I've divided into 3 areas, whereby I look at the qualitative such method, quantitative studies, and mixed method. Now, you need to start thinking about, okay, let me go back to my own research. What sort of objective did I come up with? What did I write? What keyword did I use? Are they in line with my methodology or not? And if not, then of course the problem arises somewhere. So when we talk about qualitative research, the focus, as we all know quite well, that the focus is about understanding meanings, experiences, perceptions, processes, and so on. So that's what we talk about, mostly lived experiences. So if we are going to find this information, then we need to ask what are keywords will enable us to get information we are looking for. For example, the keyword, so if anybody talks, I'm going to explore, straight at the back of my mind, I know this person is using the qualitative, not the quantitative. So we talk about understanding. What I put understand in black because it's not easy to quantify. But most books tend to use the word understand. Personally, I don't encourage any student to use the word understand because it's very difficult to measure. But the key word we use, but this terminology can be used as an undergraduate and postgraduate. So we need to be very careful here about what is recommended for postgraduate and undergraduate. So we could use the word describe, which oftentimes I don't use because more of undergraduate rather than postgraduate. But I put these words to give us an idea about what you've written and to see in what category these terminologies lie. So we talk about examine, investigate, interpret, discover, identify, analyze, and so on. I put some in red for the reason, because that's the common word that used oftentimes in the research. When it comes to quantitative studies, these are the focus more to the measurement, testing out, look for correlations, relationships, comparison, predictions, causality. So these are, if we are going to find information, and if a topic is based on relationships, is based on a comparative study, or in terms of predictions, then we've got to think about the common action verbs we can use. And this can be in terms of measuring, determining, assessing, evaluating, and so on. So what I'm trying to point out here is you to go back and look at your kind of research. If you claimed you're using qualitative and you talk about quantifying or determining, then of course you may be doing the wrong thing. And obviously that will have an impact on the sort of research you're going to be carrying out. When it comes to mixed method, that's where most of us find ourselves very much involved in. So for example, this is about the combination of qualitative and quantitative approaches. So in other words, we're going to incorporate both traditions. According to tradition, because most people use qualitative as a quantitative, especially in business studies. So the common kind of word, because it's a combination, it is an incorporation of qualitative and quantitative, then we find ourselves using explore, measuring, examine, explain, investigate, and so on. So therefore, we've got to be aware now that when we're writing a dissertation, and at the back of our mind, we've decided we're going to use either mixed method, then we've got to look for the action verbs that are going to be relevant to sort of research. And that's why oftentimes we find ourselves not doing the right method, getting that kind of information we're looking for, because the verbs we've used are completely different from what we are looking for. In the end, I talk about the common verbs for the thesis and dissertations. Most people tend to use the word explore. These are the common words, even when you read the journals. These are the common words people use: explore, examine, determine, assess, evaluate, investigate, compare, measure, and develop. So my question is, let's go back to our own research. Whether you just started, we're already doing the research, whether we're about to finish or do that other one or two, then go back and look at the verbs you've used. In what line are they? In what category do they stand? Do they give me the same kind of answers? Would I be getting the same kind of information I would have got if at all I use this particular kind of verb? So the action verbs to me play an important part. And that's why should help us determine the sort of method we're going to use. So having known all these action verbs, then you can say, okay, I'm going to explore. I'm going to explore, I'm going to measure. So I'm combining. So I've got both. I'm using the mixed method. Another thing that we need to be aware of, especially when we talk about the such action verbs. Personally, I feel that some students tend to use the same verb or action verb for both the aim and objectives. So think twice. Have I used the same kind of verbs for objectives and as well the aim? So it's a matter of ticking boxes. And if you have used maybe analyze for the aim and objectives, or both kind of objectives, I use the same kind of action verb, then I would question the reliability of your kind of method you're going to use. So it's very important for us to start thinking about, okay, what word can I use? What action verb can I use? And which can I differentiate them? Can I use different kind of verbs? Will I use the same verbs? Because if you use the same kind of verbs, you're going to have different kind of information, and that will have an impact on the sort of research you're carrying out. So I thought that it'd be important for us, before we delve into the research methods, is to get an understanding about what sort of method, what sort of verbs we're going to use that's going to help us move forward, so we know exactly when we use this verb, we use this particular method. Without it, definitely, we're going to find issues in our research. The thing I look at here is so there's going to be different types of designs. Design is, in my view, is a kind of a framework, is a plan. Okay, so research that implies planning of the methods to be used. So we all have a plan for collecting the relevant data. But if at all we've already identified, we've already used the keywords or the verbs, as I call them, action verbs, that's going to help us in terms of planning, because we're now aware about the sort of method we're going to use. So we're going to use research design, a technique that will be used for analyzing, for keeping in mind the objectives of the research study. So there's no way we can negate the idea of research objectives, whether in terms of research design. So a number of scholars have classified research according to three major perspectives. They call the primary objective, the nature of the data, and the time. But that gives us an idea in terms of the planning, which all of us find ourselves doing. Because without a plan, there is no way we can move forward. So let us think about the plan itself. Let us think about how we can move forward with our research and what we need as far as the methods are concerned. If that's the case, then we'll look at a different kind of data here. So the first thing we look at here, we're going through different classification of the design. I talk about most scholars give them three areas. The first one, the primary objective, nature of the data, and the time. So if you look at here, we've got all of us probably using the basic research, and the primary objective that can be basic research or applied research. Most of my students who are doing project DBA, they end up being over applied rather than other research, because it's more action research. But it is nothing can stop us from doing any of these. In terms of the data, Aisha could use, thank you. So the nature of the data can be either quantitative or qualitative. Those are the two methods we normally use, research methods. Of course, by combining the two, then we've got a mixed method. But generally, we can choose either one, two, or there's no rule that stops us from using one method. There's no rule that stops us from using mixed method. Again, it depends on the nature of what kind of research. The time itself can be cross-sectional or can be longitudinal. Again, depends. Some people are doing short kind of, suppose you're doing a DBA, or you're using an MBA, or maybe you're doing a dissertation, or maybe you're using, it depends on the nature of your research. So you could decide, but most of us are looking more of our research more longitudinal rather than cross-sectional. But we need to be aware, because doing a PhD is at the end of it, because we are going to start publishing papers, or some are already publishing, and some of them may require a short period of time to do the research quickly, publish it, and so on. But being aware that there's a time limit in terms of research we're going to carry out. So looking at the research itself, which is research design, we must start thinking about either quantitative or qualitative. One of the things I tend to emphasize is thinking about your strength. What's my strength as far as the research is concerned? What have I done previously? How good am I in terms of interpreting the data? Collecting the data is very, very easy. It's the analysis of it. And also the time given in terms, if it's going to be quantitative, how much time do you have? If you're going to be mixed method, then you think about both qualitative and quantitative. But there must be a primary research method you're going to have. So if you decide to be quantitative, that means you need more numbers, and then qualitative, go less numbers. But if you decide to use qualitative, then of course you need more numbers. So everything is a number crunch. So in terms of the research, that can be either quantitative or can be qualitative. If we decide to talk about quantitative, then we'll talk about experiment, which oftentimes our research doesn't require any kind of experiments. But we cannot deny the fact that some of the research may be requiring experiment, especially we talk about hypotheses, we'll test them out and so on. But also with most of our research is going to be more of experimental, which is more descriptive, correlation, predictive, or expert factor. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is being aware that whatever method you're going to choose will be leaning towards either quantitative or qualitative. If we decide to go to qualitative, then we need to start thinking about what called ethnography, which most of you might have heard. Then talk about case studies. We talk about document or content analysis. We talk about observations, grounded theory, all kind of historical research, and maybe talk about other kind of methods. So I don't want to go very much in detail regarding some kind of terminology, especially auditions, but it's very important for us to be aware that in any kind of design, and whether it's quantitative and qualitative, there's going to be a case study, no matter what. So therefore, that's something very, very common for both quantitative and qualitative. But in terms of ethnography, some of you, again, depends on the nature of the research. But if you want to know about the culture of a particular ethnicity, or a particular kind of tribe, a particular kind of individual, then of course, going there and living these individuals becomes fundamental. So going there, living with them, finding information, becomes part and parcel, then becomes an important aspect in your kind of research. And something we cannot deny, especially depends on our kind of research we're carrying out. So that's what I'm trying to emphasize, that when you choose a kind of research, please think twice about what sort of method am I going to use and how good it's going to be, and whether I'm going to get information I'm looking forward to. In terms of grounded theory, some of you talk about ground theory. If you're looking for a new theory, for example, through participants or experiences during your process of your area of investigation, then of course ground theory plays an important part. So if you're going to have a general explanation, over explanation of a particular kind of theory, the interaction we have with the participants can help us come up with what we call the ground theory. The wider number of participants you have, the better the kind of theory, it's easier to find a theory much easier. I talked about ethnography, which is a very common thing that most people are using. But if you're trying to study entire culture, obviously, you will need to use this. So that's some kind of overview of what I'm trying to emphasize. But bear in mind that in every kind of an approach, okay, there are going to be some kind of a case study, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. Again, depends on what sort of method and nature of a kind of research. And that's why I feel it is important for us to go back and ask ourselves, okay, which method fits quite well in my kind of research? The question we need to ask ourselves, how do I determine the sort of method I'm going to use for my kind of research? And that's why for me it's very important to do a bit of background reading to find out what sort of method have been used in the type of research or the type of area or your research area. It's of no value inventing the wheel, because every topic, to some extent, have been looked into, but may not be in detail as much as you think. But there's a method they've used. But if they're not using that method, you can still use that method, try it out, cut a pilot study, and see if it is reliable or valid, or being trustworthy or authentic. So in all this, we need to start thinking about the quantitative mixed method and the qualitative. But let's think about the best method. What we talk about best method, what does it mean? And I just give you an idea about what we call best research method. Okay? Just a method we conduct to generate knowledge and understanding of the situation, which is with a view of adding or make a contribution to the already existing knowledge. So if we want our objective is to expand the boundaries of knowledge, to make a verification of the acceptability of the given theory, then the best research method plays an important part. So generally, we could argue that the best research method is used to explore the fundamental basis of behavior. So it doesn't, irrespective of those bases that are applied or maybe in the real world. The best research aims in the first instance to explain, to predict, and to describe the fundamentals basis of behavior. So generally, we conduct best research, to gain and understand, get the knowledge and understanding of the phenomenon. In other situations, we find ourselves undertaking research that's called applied research. And the university is very keen about doing a research that there must be an application of it, which I find quite interesting. And I think is because otherwise, if you do a research for the sake of the knowledge and no application, then ask ourselves, when is it going to be applied? So think about when you're doing a research, think about, would I be any kind of application in my research or not? So when we talk about applied research, fundamentally, this research is conducted specifically for a particular setting with specific objective of solving the existing problem or the situation. And most people doing maybe a DBA, Doctor of Business Administration, they end up using the applied research, or maybe education where they deal with applied action research. But it's the aim of the applied research is specific to answer questions about a problem, about making a decision about a particular course of action. So applied research aims to address the answer to the real-world problems, okay, like critical trails, treatment, interventions. But oftentimes, probably that's not the basis of our kind of research. But I thought it would be a good idea to have, because I don't know the nature of your research. And because people come from different areas, other people may be involved in applied research rather than the basic research. So at least it's a good idea to have an understanding of both types of research, one for the knowledge, one for specific kind of solving problems, and so on. But in my mind, every research that we're trying to do, we have identified an area that it requires attention. And because it requires attention, therefore, we need to do some kind of research. And because we're doing a research, there are going to be different ways in which we're going to find information we need to verify it. So I just like give you now is what I've been told to do is a type of research design based on the nature of the data. We'll talk about the nature of the data. So what scholars have talked about, the primary objective, and there's the nature of the data. The nature of the data is divided into three, and that's called the qualitative, the quantitative, and mixed method. So within our plan, within our framework, we start to think about how are we going to carry out this research. Are we going to use qualitative, or use quantitative, or mixed methods? In doing that, we're going to come with what we call a research design. Within such a design, is our research going to be more descriptive? We're going to come to research. We're going to describe and explore. Is it going to be about correlation research, where the relationships, or is it going to be experimental? We're going to use for cause and effect. So this question of getting to know what is. I explain about descriptive, correlational, and experiential in my slides. So if I've got the time, I'll cover them. If I don't have the time, then I'll give the slides and you can read on your own. It's quite explained in more detail. But what I'm trying to emphasize here is we ourselves deciding about the sort of type of research design, okay? And we're going to collect the data. what sort of data are we going to collect, and in what way are we going to collect it? Are we going to use the qualitative, the quantitative, or mixed methods? But in doing that, we've got to think about our academic strength. How good are we in terms of words, interpreting the words? How good are we in terms of statistics? And if we combine the two, the mixed method, then we need to be good in both qualitative and quantitative. So let us bank on our strength with God and see if at all any of these methods is really within our means. And if something harder, then let us not go there, because the worst part is choose the method, correct the data, and unable to move forward, which of course, speak of the experience of my students, some of them have struggled. They got information, when it came to analysis, became a problem in itself. So let's go back to see about the qualitative research. Qualitative research, as I said, addresses research objectives. We cannot get away from this idea about such objectives. So it will allow us to provide elaborate interpretation of the phenomenon, of the situation, without depending on anything numerical. We talk about the perception, we talk about opinions, we talk about lived experiences. So therefore, we are going to carry such objectives that will enable us to expand, to make an interpretation of whatever we think we have found out. So we are trying to find out the true, discover the inner meanings with a view of getting new insights. So what are we going to carry out? It is about exploring the experience of people, and I call it lived experiences, because their word is their word. It's not ours. Therefore, we may have an idea of their word, but we don't know deep into it. So therefore, we're going to get more information. And then this method we use for the purpose is to find deeper meaning, which I said deeper meaning. Describe it, relate to in a certain cause, and above all, while we're doing qualitative research, we want to understand the why and the how. Those two words for me play an important part about the research. We cannot deny the fact that we are going to ask these individuals to get their experiences. And if we are going to get experiences, then we need to start thinking about, should I use qualitative research? And if I'm going to do that, how am I going to carry it out? And where am I going to have these questions I'm going to ask these individuals? I would suggest that when you talk about qualitative research, and we're going to find out the inner meanings, the new insights, you start thinking about the questions they're going to ask, the interview questions, and my belief that this question should derive from the literature review. The more literature review, the more you read, the more questions you're going to find out, and the more questions you're going to ask. So through the literature review, then we're able to identify the questions, the interview questions we're going to ask. So the qualitative data collection method, as I point out here, generally it emphasizes the interviews. Now, I wouldn't expect each and every to carry out structured, unstructured, and semi-structured interviews. But you need to start thinking about, if I use these interviews, what sort of information am I going to get? If I use structured, am I going to get the information I'm looking for? If I use unstructured, then am I going to be able to analyze it well? Now, most people end up using what called semi-structured interviews, because that gives you a leeway of using either structured or unstructured, or a combination of the two. And the advantage of semi-structured interviews, because give you a chance to have follow-up questions, which are not oftentimes in the structured interviews. One of my favorite kind of method is what we call the focus groups. I love focus groups, and I would encourage people to create focus groups, because it gives lots and lots of information. You're getting more information from more than 6 people. At least it's a bonus. If you got 2, 3 focus groups, definitely it's a bonus because you get a wide range of views from people rather than relying on one person. And it depends on how you interpret it. And I wouldn't mind to come and talk about the focus groups real at some point to give you an overview of how the focus groups are being run. Of course, every kind of method they're going to use has some kind of issues. So similar, the focus groups will require some kind of proper planning. Because we talk about qualitative data method, one of the methods we're going to talk about is observations. There's no way we can get it from observations. But I want to emphasize the importance of observing when you collect any kind of qualitative data. Because these people who are being interviewed, who are in the focus group, they have no idea they're being observed. But for your observation here is not to say what's good, what's bad about it, is how does it inform our kind of research, okay? If someone is probably thinking about something, what does it mean? If someone is yawning, if you're interviewing someone is looking miles away, what does it imply? If there was silence within the interview, what does it mean? So that's all we need to have an idea about what we're observing. And it's also important that whatever we observed, to incorporate it within our research. Because what may seem to be minimal or something small when it comes to research is very important. For example, if there was silence within the interviews, what does it imply? You ask a question and someone kept quiet for a few minutes. Otherwise, I've been in an experience whereby I collected data and somebody started crying during the interview. So what do you do next? What do the tears mean for you as a researcher? So there's a lot of things you have to observe, and you make an interpretation of what that means. Another thing that I would need to emphasize about the case studies, I've talked about before, that case studies are for both qualitative and quantitative. You may have a single case study and then use it as a means of identifying information that you're looking for. There's also another way of doing qualitative data in terms of document analysis, where the documents analyze the documents. But I think the primary resource in which you get inside information firsthand is using the qualitative data. Because that's fresh, that's why listening to it, and then just nobody else has ever collected that information. And that's why I feel that anybody who uses qualitative data is getting first kind of information, because you're getting information that nobody else has ever done it. In terms of the qualitative study, then you can learn most about the situation by you participating in it. Because you ask questions, and of course, for example, you use ethnography, then of course, that becomes easier, or ground theory. It's easier to get that information. Remember at the beginning, I say that research methodology is divided to 3. Divided research methodology, research philosophy, research as elements, and such assumptions and such approaches. Therefore, when talking about qualitative data, it lands into what's called the inductive approach, whereby the individual, it moves from specific observation to broader generalization and theories. And that gives an overview regarding the qualitative data collection method. But like any other kind of method, we're going to think about what's good about this method. As a researcher, you've got to know both ways or both angles. You've got to know the merits and the demerits of a particular method. There's no method you're going to use that will have any kind of issues. Each method has its own issues. And it is important to be aware. And oftentimes, it's also good to include, to show an awareness in your research. You're aware of the merits and demerits of the method you're going to use. So, in terms of qualitative research method, as I said before, we are doing the research in the natural setting. We are not going outside people's comfort zone. We are getting information from them, but you play an important part in the research. So the researcher is a key instrument. And the information you get is very important. However, the interpretation of it is far important than the information itself. Because anybody can give you information, but how does it, what sort of interpretation you get out of it? What does it mean? So the meaning of what people have said plays an important part. So in terms of qualitative research method, there is vital important part is what's called participatory, whereby you play a part and the participants or interviewees take part. In the way I look at it, you as a researcher should have less words. Let the words come from the participant or the interviewee. So in other words, limit how many words you're going to ask, to say. And let the person take the upper hand, take the show, let the interviewee speak more than you. Now, you've got to be very cautious because oftentimes it happens because we talk about the form method is participatory, everyone to participate. However, it happens in some cases where the individuals, where the researcher becomes an interviewee, and interviewee becomes an interviewer. Because the roles at times change. So it all depends on you as a researcher of how you're going to conduct this research. Some interviews are overpowering, and you can reach a point whereby say, okay, I say, what about you? What do you think? Okay, but it's me support. No, you. What about you? What do you think? So the roles can keep on changing. So being firm in the question you're asking plays an important part. So participation is vital, but at the same time, be cautious of to what extent will you participate in the research. Now, there's also participatory. There's also the other way of looking for information that is irrelevant to the research. So applying may not be fundamental, may not play an important part as far as it's concerned. I talk about direct observation, which is already straightforward. I'm pointing it out that we're observing directly, but they may not, for you, whatever you're seeing, you're jotting down. You are trying to commute to point it out on your own mind, to register it in your own mind that this is what's happening. Another thing that I found is important is what's called in-depth interviewing. In-depth interviewing is about you going deeper into the student, into the interviewee's kind of inner kind of areas to give you more details about the kind of information you're looking for without forcing them, but asking questions. And if you design the question quite well from the literature review, then of course becomes easier for you in terms of going in depth about the question you're asking. And of course, within the form method is about analyzing documents. We talk about that document analysis, which is also part of the qualitative research. Now, these have given some kind of qualitative research, some of the strength and the qualitative research kind of strength and weaknesses. Some of the things that I point out are not very common to some extent, but I felt that was a need for me to go deeper to explain some of the things that really are so important. If you look at the books about, they give us some of the qualitative, get right insights, get deep understanding, consistent kind of information, flexible approach. Let's go beyond the obvious and say, okay, what is really fundamental when it comes to qualitative research? If I use qualitative research, what do I benefit from it? First, it's useful to conduct limited in-depth case studies or interviews. So it's small, but in-depth, plays an important part. But you're also useful for describing complex situations or phenomena. It's useful for specific environment, the context and the condition, where some people talk about contextual information you're going to get. It includes the research and people's personal experiences of events. And that, for me, is a lived experience, which, of course, forms part and parcel. Now, what if these people are doing it, they're telling about the experience you've experienced? Okay? Now, do you come in or just keep quiet and wait until? Or if they tell something and you feel, oh, it's purely a lie, do you interject? What do you do? So that's something that we need to be aware when it comes to people sharing their personal experiences. Because it's so personal, again, depends on how they interpret those kind of experiences. Research is more dynamic and flexible. Most people talk about flexible approach as one equated research kind of strength. But research findings in words and I could explain the phenomena better and more in depth because people are expounding it. And I think there's no reason why you cannot ask the interviewee to elaborate on what something they talk about and so on. The weaknesses, there are so many weaknesses we need to talk about qualitative research, but I'll give you some kind of examples. It might not be general, it applies to specific context. Insufficient research data does not test out to test the hypothesis or be a theory. It could be time consuming, resource intensive, and can be also influenced by research personal biases. So there's a lot of things, but so we need to be aware that yes, we can research, but the weakness should not be more than the strength itself. So let us look at more the positive aspects. And so what's the benefit of this method? What am I going to get out of it? In terms of quantitative research, then of course, as I go back, that it has to address the research objectives. So once the research objectives are clear, then we can cut an empirical assessment. We know it's going to involve some numbers and going to analyze it. That's absolutely fine. So use of numbers, percentages, statistics, of course, which are from the survey, construct interviews helps a lot. So if you're good at numbers, I would suggest in terms of selection method, you use the quantitative research method. In terms of such approaches, then of course, use deductive approach that goes from more general to more specific, from theory to specific confirmation that needs to be proven. So you can see what I talk about that one was inductive and this more of deductive approach. So that's why we've got to differentiate between research methodology and research methods. So what does it mean in quantitative research with regard to the researcher? The only thing, you're objective observer. You neither participate nor influence what's being studied. The only influence you have is the questions you've designed. But in terms of the responses, I'm afraid you don't. Neither can you question and do anything else. So that's why you find, though the data is numerical, the results need to have been descriptive and elation per cause. So you can see why we tend to use various methods. And that's what mixed method, of course, plays an important part because you've got both the lived experiences and also you've got what I call them the regimented way. Because it's called regimented, I call it regimented because it's such a way that you cannot change anything and you cannot influence anybody. It's what is. If you ask the question, this answer, they give you an answer that they think they should give you. You cannot question, why have you chosen this? So there's no kind of going back and asking, by the way, why didn't you think about the other one as compared to qualitative and so on? I've given some kind of quantitative data collection method, but my idea behind is to find out which one have you used so far? And it's a question, so which one are you aware of and which one do you think is more conducive in terms of carrying out quantitative data? For example, questionnaire is one of the ways people are going to use. But the question is, how are you going to write the questions? Where are you going to derive those questions from? Generally, the question should derive from the teaching review. And of course, there's a lot of thinking when it comes to quantitative data collection method and also design the questions. We'll talk about experiments because that's may not come, but we'll talk about a structured observation. Okay, so now that you're observing, which of course may not be straightforward, but you can see what's happening. And also the observation can be based on for example, the question you've sent, give this to the participants. And if you find one question is left out, you can ask yourself, why has it been left out? Is it because it's unclear? Is it because it was not well written? What is exactly has happened? And then quantitative method, you can use other. We talk about here, you can use document analysis for qualitative, but you can use existing database. I talk about the tools, which of course, which you need to start thinking about. But again, at this moment in time, is to find out what other people have they used and to what extent. Now, most people have used Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, SPSS, Excel, Strata, and so on. There's so many methods we tend to use. But let's capitalize on our own strength and ask ourselves which one is more appropriate for us and which one are we good at. Now, most people find use Excel difficult or SPSS, they end up using Microsoft Word. So let us bank on the strength we've got when it comes to data collection method. I just went through to give you about the strength and weakness, which I feel are so fundamental in terms of understanding the quantitative research method. I don't want to emphasize the importance of knowing what's good about this method and what's weak about this method. And you can see the weaknesses are so small when it comes to quantitative research. And you can see more as time consuming, could be time consuming sometimes because you're writing all the questions, and also that question as could be resource intensive. So therefore, but is more the strength. So anybody who is using this kind of quantitative method, then I feel that has got a lot to benefit from, because everything is guided by the question you've designed, and of course some of the answers you're expecting. So which is an ideal, especially for the people who are very good at numbers and want to continue with that. So you can see the benefit of that and so on. And of course, some of the strengths, you talk about large samples, you talk about statistical precision, you talk about generalization of findings, you talk about easy comparison. So there's a lot of benefit when it comes to the quantitative and so on. But in terms of the weaknesses, as I pointed out, beside the time consuming, there's limited depth, because you're not going to go deep into this, because people give you whatever they think. They tick boxes or they give you an answer and that is it. So, and what is for me is important here, which I feel that we need to start thinking about in quantitative research, that it overlooks what I call the human experience. It's not taken into account at all. So everything is just tick box. So whatever you're feeling, going through, is negated, is not taken into account. And I feel that is another issue we need to think about. So I've talked about so many things regarding the method, but time for us to pause and think about, okay, let's go back to what we've done so far. So we've talked about research objectives. We've talked about the qualitative and quantitative. So out of these two, which do you think are most appropriate for your study and why? It's something we start thinking about and say, okay, based on what Denis has said, let me go back and look at my work. I say, am I on the right line? Let's not look at my such objectives. Are those of such objectives correlate with what all are aligned with my method I've chosen? And once we're able to identify that, it is very helpful in one way or another. So let's think about these two methods I've talked about so far and start thinking about the relevance of this method in our kind of research and how applicable they are. Then this leads into what we call the mixed methods, which most of you are trying to use. But I have my reservation when it comes to mixed method. You've got to have both ideas, both the qualitative and the quantitative. So look at our own strength. We ask ourselves, which one is more conducive for me? Which is good for me? And which can I manage? And which give you better information? It doesn't necessarily mean because you've used only one method that your PhD is less important. Whether you use one method, two methods, three methods, it is, at the end of the day, is what are your findings? Do your findings make a contribution to the wider knowledge? And if it does, it doesn't matter. But however, if we make a choice of going for a mixed approach, then we want to research, we collect the information, we want to analyze it, we're going to integrate both quantitative and the quantitative and the qualitative. So that's what we need to think about. So in that, we've got observations, interviews, focus group, we've got data collected questionnaires, and so on. So it's a combination of various methods. It's a map of studies, so we've got to start thinking about, okay, what sort of method is more appropriate for me? Which can I use? So we are trying to involve both quantitative and qualitative data. One of the things that I tend to look at is look at our time frame. When you've got a time frame, you ask ourselves, if I'm going to carry out mixed method, how much time do I need for quantitative and qualitative? If you find the timing itself is shorter, then I'm afraid you won't go deeper into the subject. So you may end up just on the periphery, not get the information you're looking for, and that limits the number of the participants. So you've got to weigh up, okay, I'm decided to do this mixed methods, so that I've got to think twice. And how much time do I have? So within your research design, then you've got to think about, talk about the timing itself, you think about where am I going to incorporate these two, and so on. And will I be able to complete within a given period of time, or it's going to lag me behind and I won't be able to complete my research, and so on. I don't want to emphasize that, but what I emphasize is being aware of what is advantages and disadvantages. Once we know these things, it helps us to make a decision about what method we're going to use. But I can see the mixed method when a key word is being used is called triangulation, whereby you're combining more than one method. And the word I could not ignore, it complements our strengths and weaknesses we have identified in qualitative and qualitative. So it's a kind of gives more strength, more energy, So in other words, it completes what are called generalization results. We've cut out a risk. If we only use quantitative alone, that will give a clear picture. If you use only qualitative, but if you combine the two, then of course there is more advantages in terms of the research we've carried out. Some of the weaknesses which are completely, some of you are quite aware of, is more complex. And one of the things from my point out previously is about the kind of the timing itself. Okay, you have enough time for both qualitative and quantitative. If you've got enough time, that's fine. Again, depends on how we organize ourselves. Resource intensive, risking confuse such finding from quantitative and qualitative. Another kind of thing you start thinking about, am I going to use the same people that were interviewed or took part in quantitative? Am I going to use the same individuals who took part in quantitative to do the qualitative, or am I going to get different people altogether? And if you're going to use the same people, then what's going to happen? Are they going to give you the same kind of information? And if they do, are you moving forward or going backward, or stagnant, or stationed? So that's something you start thinking about if you're going to use mixed method. Do you have, what's your population and what's the size of the population? So that's something we need to think about. So some of the examples I could talk about the mixed method study, for example, how effective is online learning? And that's one of the things that emphasize the importance about. So the survey, you can decide to get out to survey 1,000 undergraduate business students, which is pretty good. It's a good number. But then you end up with interviewing 20 undergraduate business students. The question is, are these 20 students derived from the 1,000? And if they are they not going to tell exactly what they thought before? Will that not contaminate your findings? So you've got to weigh up when you come to the mixed methods. You got 1,000 and you pick 20, okay? But that's, to me, the 20 is a supplement of the first method you've used. It's confirming, give you an idea about the confirmation. So in other words, you've got two areas to consider: the statistical strengths and personal experiences, and how are you going to integrate the two. And that's why it becomes an issue of some students. So you've got to start thinking harder when it comes to the mixed method study. It sounds good, but then there's that integration of the methods, phase 1 and phase 2. If only phase 1 could have been straightforward, but you've got phase 2, then you've got phase 3, and the phase 3 is the integration of the two, the social trends and personal experiences. So that's the matter. We need to weigh up the sort of method we're going to use, which is pretty good. So if that's the case, then we need to think about choose the right method. Okay. Some of the quick questions I'm going to ask. Let's go back to our search objectives. Where I started from. So what is a search objective? Which search objective is really going to help you to get information you're looking for? In most cases, you find that students have got either 3 objectives, but I've also seen one PhD that had only 2 objectives, which are questioned. So personally, I just tell my students, you have to have 3 to 5 objectives. That makes more sense. And if, again, depends what data you're looking for. If the data you're looking for is going to derive from qualitative and quantitative, then 3 objectives are inadequate. They are not enough. It also depends on the resources available, not only the resources, but also the population, the sample size, the level of depth required. So if you're going to go deeper into the subject, get a better understanding of the sort of from the population, then maybe you talk about ethnography or talk about grant theory or any other method you're going to use, then you think about to what extent am I going to go deeper into a subject. If I ask 1,000 people, that's okay. But if I go to interview 1,000, then of course, how am I going to analyze this data? And it will find that I've seen one of the dissertation or the PhD students came to me and said, by the way, I want to interview 100 people. Please be very careful about this rounding up the numbers. 100 people sounds good, sounds easy to interview. But you've got to think about what's going to happen if they start telling you the same kind of information. So you've got to think twice. And how are you going to analyze and how depth are you going to remember you make an interpretation. So for my previous example, I've given about 20 interviews and 1,000 kind of, that makes more sense because 20 interviews, that is ideal. But some of I've been asked so many questions, say, how many interviews do you need to carry out? There is no number limit about the interviews. You can have 5, you can have 10, because you're not forcing these people, you're not paying them anything to carry the interview, to respond to your questions or to be interviewed. Therefore, the number you get is what you bank on. You strive, you work hard to get more people, but it depends how many people are going to respond. Another thing that probably choosing that method could be what's the target population? What's the sample size? What's ideal? And I always emphasize, you as a researcher, you've got to have a number at the back of your mind. How many people are likely to take part in my questionnaire? So have a number at the back of your mind, so maybe 50, 100. If you get a number right, that's fantastic. If you get a number low, that's absolutely fine, but at least you've got to have a number. Similarly to the interviews, you've got to think about how many people I like to take part in my research. If you aim at 40 and get 50, that's a bonus. If you aim at 20 and get 10, that's, of course, that's what you've got. So the target population plays an important, and that also helps in terms of determining the research method you're going to choose. So having the right questions plays an important part as far as research is concerned. So let's talk about some of the common mistakes. Some of the mistakes that often occur in terms of such method selection. Oftentimes, we choose a method based on familiarity. Oftentimes, it's based on what we did previously. Because, I meant to interview 20 people, therefore I'm able to interview 20 people. It may not work when you're doing a doctorate. Familiarity may not be the best choice or the best objective. Another thing that happens, remember I go back to my research objectives, people tend to ignore them completely as if they don't exist. You set yourself a goal. You wrote objectives. It's better to revisit these objects from time to time. And I've seen some people, even when writing methodology, they go back to such objectives to guide them in terms of what they'll be writing about. If you ignore such objectives set yourself, then of course, that's going to be a problem when it comes to research method selection. Or if you didn't use the right action verbs, that would be a problem regarding such method. Another thing, the common mistake in such method can be collect unnecessary data. People can tell you a story and say you are talking about the story, but the actual fact is irrelevant. So don't be taken up by what people are saying. You're guided by the question you've got. Therefore, stick to those questions, especially for the interviews. There are some people who are salespeople who are very good at talking, and they divert you, talk about what about this, what about that, and eventually say, where am I? You see, think about when you go on the internet and you're finding out something, and then you went for one particular kind of thing, and there's an advert comes, then something else, and by the time you realize that, you forget what you went for in terms of what you're searching for. So similarly, when it comes to such methods, if you collect the data that's necessary, not unnecessary, or use it to a small sample. If a sample is so small, that may have an impact that shows that such method chosen may not be the right method for that particular kind of topic, and so on. Or a mismatch between questions and the methods, or a mismatch between such objectives and the methods. So if we don't get a such objective correct, I'm afraid it's going to mislead us. We're going to have a wrong choice of the research method. And that's why I insist from time to time, please go back and look at the objectives. The objectives are not written on concrete stone. The objective can be changed. Not even the topic can be changed slightly, but object can be changed based on the findings. So therefore, it's vitally important to look at the objectives to determine the sort of method you're going to use. Just to wrap up, I gave time for the questions. So what we've explored so far is look about qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method. So something we need to take away that when we look at the quantitative, what exactly are we looking for? When we look at the quantitative or mixed method, we understand quite well that everything that we're doing should, in terms of determining the method, should have been thought about when we were writing such objectives. So within the qualitative, we're going to ask people's perceptions, people's views, people's opinions. So we're going to explore more information from them. We are going to be very rich in terms of getting descriptive data because people are telling us about their own story. And we can also use it to identify themes based on the information we've got from them. In terms of quantitative, then of course, is purely statistical, numerical data. We are trying to test out the waters. We have to find out, reduce numerical percentages and so on. So using pie charts, using tables, and so on, play an important part when it comes to quantitative. When it comes to mixed method, then we're trying to combine both the strength, then we'll try to combine the qualitative and the quantitative, which of course requires a lot of effort, requires a lot of time. And in the end, we're not only doing qualitative and quantitative, but we want to integrate those findings. And those, to provide us what's called comprehensive insights. And if you're going to do that, it's very, very helpful. So you can see why I emphasize the importance of having different kind of methods and so on. So based on all this, I just want to leave you with some kind of reflection based on what I've talked about. So I've got 3 questions which I feel that we need to start pondering upon. First, what such topic or such question topic are you currently working on? Good. So you've got your topic, but because of that topic, think about the aim, think about the such objectives. And based on what I've said here, are those such objectives in line or align with your chosen methods? And if it does, then you're in a better position. And if not, revisit the such objectives. And therefore, because of that, then you could ask which such methods will be most appropriate and why. So you've looked at those objectives and said, okay, now, based on what I've heard about qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method, where does my such topic stand? Is it topic I've chosen, or this method, is it appropriate or not? And if not, if it's inappropriate, that means the answers we're going to get may be completely different, and we may struggle with making an analysis. Now, that you have completed this research methodology masterclass organized by DEO. What are your next steps in applying what you've learned today? So let's think about this, what I've talked about. And let's go back and say, okay, yes, I've heard about this masterclass. Now, what am I going to apply? What else can I do? This is a jigsaw. What's missing in my kind of research? What else can I do to improve it? And I think that will help us in terms of getting an understanding about why you've chosen that kind of method and why you think that method is appropriate. By doing that, then I do believe that you're going to make the right choices for the methods and so on. So thanks very much. And I've got 9 minutes. I started with 20 minutes. But if you've got any question, I'm more than happy to answer the questions.